Started. Welcome to the League of Women Voters webinar on alternative voting systems. I'm Katharine Biele, President of the League of Women Voters of Utah, and tonight we'll be hearing about two of the dozens of voting systems out there, ranked choice voting and approval voting. The Center for Election Science essentially breaks down some of the best and worst voting systems and suggests that while we go through these presentations, you should be thinking of these questions. Does it choose a good winner? Does it foster real competition? And is it simple? With that, I'm happy to introduce our presenters. Kelley Potter, Executive Director of the Utah Ranked Choice Voting. She has been a high school government teacher and adjunct professor of American government. She gained her passion for improving our elections through serving as Utah's state election director, as well as on the city council and as mayor of Heber City. Nate Allen is founder and executive director of Utah Approves. He's also a board member of Equal Vote and has held positions as the state chair of the Utah Forward Party and the Tools and Resources Coordinator for the National Forward Party. Brian McKenzie, County Clerk for Davis County, has been working in the election administration field since 2006. He was elected in 2022, holds a bachelor's degree in business administration, and is a certified elections and registration administrator. He began his public service career as records preservation officer and later took an opportunity to get involved in elections. He's very active in the state of Utah, working with fellow county clerks, election officials, and state legislators in pursuing continual improvements in accessibility and security of the state's elections processes. He's here to tell us what county clerks think of these systems. I'm sure you'll have questions for our presenters. Please put your questions in the Q&A and we'll get to them following the presentations. We will be recording this session, but are not sure exactly when the video will be up, so please check your Facebook page first. With that, we'll start with Kelley Potter. Kelley, it's all yours.
All right, thank you so much. I will share my screen and pull these slides up. And first, I want to say thank you for the opportunity and thank you to everyone that's here. Elections are such an important, fundamental part of our country, and everyone who is involved and gets educated, I believe, wants the best for our country and wants us to be able to see how we can improve our system. And so I will just jump in with my slides right here. And let's see if I got that right. Desktop. This is where it all is. Okay, let's see. Why is it not working? Share. Okay, I think we got it. Can you guys see my my slides?
Yes, you don't have it on slideshow though yet. So
okay, slideshow. There we go. Okay. So first of all, I just want to, anybody that is interested, I'm assuming that most people here know what ranked choice voting is. So I'll just give you an opportunity if you want to look this website up. It kind of gives you an opportunity to vote in a mock election for our current U.S. Senate race that's happening right now. I'm sure everyone's got ballots in hand or you've already turned them in. And you can see when you put out preliminary results, kind of how it works. There haven't been, it's just new. So there's not a ton of people that have participated. But it gives you an opportunity to see in real time what a ranked choice voting election might look like. And just so you know, here's a map showing where ranked choice voting has been used in our country. There's many different ways of using ranked choice voting. We have presidential primaries in 2020 in a few states. We've got primaries and special elections in a few states. You can see Utah's purple because in Utah, we have this pilot program where for the last 3 municipal election cycles, cities have been allowed to opt in and try this out in a pilot. So there's becoming, because of all of these different races and experiences, there's a lot of data now and experiences to analyze this. And we have our own in Utah that we get to look at and see how did it go? What did we learn? So with that, I'm going to skip this video and
Pick your
I'm
favorite
sorry.
food
Why is-
using ranked choice.
sorry. I was going to skip that. So just so you know, for those who aren't familiar, briefly, you just rank the candidates in order of preference, and then the first choice votes are counted. And then the question is there someone with a majority? Does someone have over 50%? And if not, then you drop the lowest person of those candidates, and their second choice votes apply until there's a winner with over 50% of the vote. And that is, there are many ways of using ranked choice voting in our country, but this is the basics of it. It's just ranking your preferences. And sometimes people say, well, that's so confusing, but most of us have been ranking things our whole lives. We start off when we're little kids and mom says, what do you want for dinner? Well, I'd like a hot dog, but if we don't have that, I'll take some macaroni and cheese or whatever. So we all have had experiences ranking. And so that is something that in ranked choice voting is the common denominator, although there are different ways of using it in different states and different ways of counting. So just the most recent municipal election cycle was 23. We had 12 cities use it in 3 counties. And so next year, 2025, is the last year that's included in the current legislation for the pilot program. And there are a lot of cities right now looking at it for 2025. So I just want to talk about a few reasons why ranked choice voting has some advantages. As everyone will agree, there is no perfect election system. If we could get everyone in the same room and we could vote and see what everyone really wants, we could do that, but that's impossible. So we have to look at the pros and cons of all the different options. And so one of the things that's a pro for cities is that we can save money for taxpayers. Cities, when they use ranked choice voting, have the option of eliminating the primary election. I was the mayor of Heber City, and many times we would have a primary election to eliminate one candidate. So when you have to do mail-in votes, you're doubling your cost with 2 elections. So it's easy to save money by eliminating the primary. And shorter, less expensive city campaigns. Many voters find it exhausting to have campaign signs out all the time every year. And this allows cities to just focus on a single election in November and not the primary in August. Makes it easier for voters and candidates, so it saves money in that way as well. In Utah, all cities have the county clerk run their municipal elections. So everyone has access to equipment that can run a ranked choice voting election at the current time. One thing that's great about ranked choice voting is it allows voters to more fully express their will. They can say, wow, I really like my neighbor Jane. I don't think she has a chance though, but I'm going to rank her first. And if she loses in the first round and only had 10%, I still get to weigh in on the other candidates. That is how we can see better what voters want, where they don't have to strategize and say, gosh, I really want Jane, but I don't dare to vote for her because I don't think she's going to make it. The final tally between the last 2 candidates, the winner always has to have 50% plus 1 to win that election. We often look at elections and someone's elected with 30-something%. We might see that in our upcoming US Senate race or the 3rd congressional district. And you can say, wow, 65% of the people did not want the person who won. In a ranked choice voting election, they have to have 50% support, whether it's through first choice or second or beyond. So you often get a candidate with broader and deeper support. Again, eliminates the spoiler effects. We have seen in many elections, presidential elections, many elections, where someone draws votes away from a candidate who was preferred by voters, but they take just enough away that another candidate wins. So with ranked choice voting, that eliminates that. Also, I want to talk a little bit about bullet voting. In Utah, we, I think I got these out of order, but I'll just, 1 second. I lost a slide. Okay, I'm going to back up. In Utah, when we have multiple, I'm going to sorry, I lost a slide. One of the things I like the most about ranked choice voting is the incentives for candidates are to be more civil. If I'm running for mayor and I go out and tell everyone, gosh, I think the rest of these people are idiots and I'm the best one, they're probably not going to want to pick me for their second choice. So it incentivizes candidates to be more civil, and it incentivizes voters to look a little deeper and look at issues and not just jump on the bandwagon with one person and kind of create this polarization that we see in our country today. So that's my favorite thing about ranked choice voting. But let me talk about bullet voting. When I first ran for city council a long time ago, everyone said, just tell your supporters to only vote for one. And it was a city council race where there were 8 candidates and there were 2 spots. And as you know, in cities in Utah, sometimes there are 3, sometimes there are 2. But if somebody chooses to vote for more than one, it could help the other person beat their favorite candidate. So often campaigns will tell people, just bullet vote, just pick one person, just pick me, don't vote for anybody else. And that way you're not accidentally helping someone you don't like as well. Well, interestingly, people say that about ranked choice voting, but Josh Daniels on our team did an analysis, and he looked at Lehigh, and he said in 2019, they saw 16.6% of the people just picked one candidate when there were multiple seats. In 2021, they had ranked choice voting, and that decreased the bullet voting by 78%. So people could feel free to express their will about all the candidates and not just strategize and vote for one. We saw the same thing in Springville, where in 2021, they used RCV and had just over 4% of the people bullet vote, and then didn't use it in 23. And we saw the increase by 310% of people who did not use more than one vote because of the way the system worked in our traditional plurality system. So that's an important thing. I just want to share a little bit of data. Y2 Analytics has done really highly statistically significant surveys after the last 2 municipal ranked choice voting elections to try and help get a sense of what voters thought about their experience. Well, the vast majority of voters said that they found it very easy. There was not the confusion that people thought. And once they did it, it was intuitive. Even one of the things when Josh and Amelia were in Utah County, they went to a senior center and just gave them the ballots, didn't give them an explanation. And they had a very similar error rate as they do in any other election. The same thing's been done in a junior high. Like, it's just not that hard for voters to figure out how to rank their candidates. 90% of the participants said their instructions were clear on their ranked choice voting ballot. 3 out of 5 voters in ranked choice voting elections liked the process. Interestingly, there were differences between cities, but every city in Utah that has used it, over 50% of the voters have said they liked it. There was a lower percentage in Sandy, and those who are familiar with that election, there were many candidates for mayor. There was some misinformation and some confusion in the code around a recount. That's been fixed since then, but many people really like using ranked choice voting. And Sutherland did a study, and the numbers go up. The more people use it, the more they like it. Oh, this is the one that I skipped. I'm so sorry, I got those mixed up. But RCV elections can be audited like any other election. It protects from these wasted votes. We can show the results of the same, and the more civil elections. I'll just zip through those and get to most people were more likely to vote for their favorite candidate and not strategize the way that I talked about earlier. And satisfaction rates for their experience in those elections, as you can see from this slide, were very high with people in both RCV and non-RCV elections. So people in Utah have a good experience voting. Let's see. Okay. Oh, why is it not moving? Okay. And then one thing I want to talk about briefly is whether it matters if a candidate has a majority of votes. It's not something that in Utah, because we're used to having these elections this way, that we have had a ton of conversations around, but I think it's starting to happen as we look at, like I mentioned earlier, the US Senate race with 4 candidates this year and the congressional seat in the 3rd district with 5 candidates. We could have winners in the 30s or even possibly in the 20s in the one race. Our current governor won with 37%, I believe. Blake Moore in the first district won with 30%. Somebody that's better with numbers probably remember those. But anyway, most voters, clearly the numbers, 85% of voters said it was important to them that a candidate wins with a majority of votes. And that is something that we have to think about because of our democracy and giving people power. We want to know that more than half of the people really do support them in those positions. So in closing, I just, so you know, if a city wants to use ranked choice voting, they just vote on it in the council. They notify their county clerk and lieutenant governor's office by May 1st of next year. And then currently the pilot program sunsets after the 25 election. And just for more resources, the Herbert Institute has been doing a lot of research on this. If you go to their website under policy research, you'll see some papers that they have done. They're currently working on another one. There's a lot of information on the Fair Vote website about different ranked choice voting around the state, around the country. And finally, there's a mathematics professor at Wellesley College that just wrote a book called Making Democracy Count: How Mathematics Improves Voting, Electoral Maps, and Representation. And he said, after all of his studies, he said, turns out RCV is the best. It does a great job at many things. We have evidence now from all kinds of ranked choice voting elections that have occurred in the US over the past decade or two. It captures the will of the majority in a really good way. So with that, I will close. You can always go to our website, which is Utah Ranked Choice Voting, utahrcv.com, and feel free to reach out with questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelley. We'll get back to you with other questions. Let's move on to Nate Allen with Utah Approves. Nate.
All right, yeah, thanks, Colleen. And Katharine, can everyone see my screen okay now?
Yes.
Great, awesome. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for being here today. As Colleen said, voting is very important, and the fact that you're here participating in a panel discussion and listening to a panel discussion about the cornerstone of our democracy shows how much you care about the system. So thanks for being here. Where I wanted to start today was just backing up a little bit and talking about the value of why we vote and then why our current system doesn't really work that well. So to start, we vote to elect the candidate who can best reflect the values of the voters, or in other words, the goal is for the winner to be the most representative of the average voter in the given population that you're electing someone in. So the question is, why doesn't choose one voting work, the system that we've been using for a very long time? Well, one thing that I want to point to is that choose one voting works by selecting the candidate who represents the largest single slice of the population, but not necessarily broadly across the population. You can see on this graph here at the very top, I've listed the average Utah voter, and beneath that it says a 6.1. Now that's a 6.1 on a scale of progressive to conservative, and this was from a survey that was done of Utahns broadly representative recently. And so an example of a race that might occur here statewide in Utah is shown on this pie chart here, where you have Charlie, who is a 2.1 on this scale, Bob, who is a 6.2, and then Alice, who's an 8.3 on that scale. Now, most times in Utah, the winner is going to be Alice, but for some reason, it's not Bob, who is actually closest to that average Utah voter. And the biggest reason for this is something that we call vote splitting. So you can see at the bottom here the makeup of the Utah electorate. Typically what happens if someone drops in this 6.1 slot or somewhere near that, they're going to split that moderate Republican vote with the conservative Republicans in the state. And so what happens is that the conservative Republicans end up having that largest single slice, or in other words, a plurality of the population, even though there's somebody who better represents all Utah voters. So getting to approval voting, you might be wondering what approval voting is. Essentially, it just lets you say yes or no to each candidate rather than saying yes to only one. In other words, giving your opinion on every candidate, whether you like them or you don't. The candidate with the most yes votes wins, so you just tally up all those yes votes, and whoever has that highest approval rating is the person who wins the election. You can see an example of the ballot here on the right side, where filling in the bubble is a yes and not filling in the bubble is a no. So it's an extremely simple method that basically just changes the ballot instruction line from vote for one candidate to mark all names that you approve of. Now, the biggest thing about this is that it prevents vote splitting. So instead of having to choose just one person, you can choose the people across the spectrum that you like. So you might choose the conservative Republican if you're on that side, but also choose that independent. Or if you are a Democrat, you might choose the Democrat and choose that independent. And so basically, approval voting is different because it doesn't elect based on exclusive support, where you really love that one candidate that falls solely in that slice of the population that best represents you individually or might be close to you, but you can actually choose multiple people on your ballot. And so the person who wins under approval voting wins based on a favorability rating. So rather than the largest single slice, you have to appeal broadly across multiple slices of the population to win under approval voting, which ensures that we're choosing the person who is actually most representative of the entire electorate. Now, our current system, plurality voting, works really well when you only have two candidates in the race. And that makes sense. You can just say, I like this person over this person. But when you start adding more candidates in the race, approval voting works a lot better because you can choose all of the people that you like and don't have to worry about vote splitting. So it works with any number of candidates. So if we run the same scenario with approval voting, you'll see that Bob comes out as the winner because, again, if you are a moderate Republican, you can choose Bob, but you can also choose Alice, and you'll see that Alice's vote percentage didn't change much in this scenario. People still liked her, but Bob was actually liked the most across the population. And because people felt free to choose him as well and didn't get their vote split between the moderate Republicans, Bob actually comes out on top as the winner, meaning that we chose the best person in the population. So aside from the simple fact that approval voting chooses the most representative candidate consistently, there's also some practical considerations on why we at Utah Approves really like approval voting. And that falls into the categories of cost effectiveness, security, and administration. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is something called precinct summability. This is kind of a jargony term that basically just means that we are able to count ballots in the individual locations that they are cast. Now, Utah's election system is what we call a bottom-up election system, where votes are cast in individual precinct locations and tallied in those locations, with vote totals then being sent to a central reporting location. There are some other states that do it top-down, where you have everything kind of tallied in one central location. All of the ballots are sent to that central location before they're counted and reported. But Utah's system doesn't work that way, and approval voting is incredibly compatible with the way that our current system already works. In addition to that, approval voting doesn't require any new voting machines or software, so it'd be really cheap to implement. Eliminating primaries is also possible under approval voting, so there's a lot of cost-saving potential for cities if they wanted to use approval voting. And another thing that we really like to talk about is that the ballot size under approval voting stays the same. So the way that we print our ballots in Utah, we use multiple columns to save paper. So you'll see one race in one column, another in a second column, and a third column, and multiple races listed there. With some other alternative voting systems, that spans the entire page. And so now you need multiple pages rather than just one page, which significantly increases the cost of mail-in voting and printing the ballots. But approval voting works the exact same way that we currently do it, because again, that only change to the ballot is to that instruction line. Additionally, voter education is extremely cost efficient. That's because it is a very simple method. There's that simple change and people understand, oh, I can just mark all of the names that I like. People are used to this kind of system in city council races where you can choose 2 or 3 people, but instead of just choosing 2 or 3, there's no cap. You can choose as many people that you like. For this reason, and maybe Brian can expand on this a little bit, but we have heard that the county clerks state that the approval voting has an audit trail that they are comfortable with, and that's something that we really value. We value the opinions of our administrators in the state. So getting onto the state of approval voting, historically approval voting has been used for a long time. It's been used to elect a pope. It's been used in Venice, Italy. It was used in the ancient Greek legislature. So it's been around for thousands of years, and it's currently still used to elect the UN General Secretary. In the US, it's currently used in 2 places. Fargo, North Dakota was the first place to implement approval voting, and then St. Louis, Missouri followed shortly after. You can see some exit polling that was done from voters that used approval voting in St. Louis on the right here. Voters felt that the instructions were clear, it was easy to understand and easy to use. They felt comfortable with approval voting. They liked the increased expressivity. They liked it in general. They wanted to expand its use. They felt that it could increase turnout, and they felt the election was more positive. And something to note is that even though this bottom one election was more positive, only 49% of people said yes. Another third of people were neutral on that fact. So on all of these questions, 80% or more said that each of these questions were a positive improvement on our current election system. Now, in Utah, we are currently in discussions with the legislature to see if they would be interested in providing approval voting as an option to cities. And while we have those discussions, we're going around to present to city councils to talk to them about writing a letter to request the legislature just provide it as an option to them. That's going pretty well so far. Just in the past few months, we've received 4 letters from Huntsville, North Ogden, South Ogden, and Plain City, and we expect a few more to roll in here in the next couple of weeks, which is really exciting for us. So it seems like there's a nice appetite for approval voting being offered as an option for cities to experiment with. So backing up a little bit, what would it look like if it was implemented in Utah? So approval voting simply can just be used in every race in Utah, from statewide races to municipal races. And additionally, this includes party primaries, caucuses, and conventions. So I put this slide deck together shortly after the Republican convention happened, where there was round by round voting that occurred until early morning. Approval voting would be a really simple fix to that problem, where you could just do it in one ballot and you could have everyone home by dinner. Additionally, due to the simplicity of not needing new voting machines or new voting software and it being precinct summable, it could also be very easily implemented today. We've had conversations with the Director of State Elections, Ryan Kelley, and he has said that there is no administrative concerns with approval voting being used in higher level races, which is also something that we really care about. We want to make sure that this is a simple process. And in addition to all of the simplicity that I've mentioned, it comes along with those added benefits of making sure that we choose the candidate who best reflects the voters' values across the state or in any individual district. So lastly, if you're interested, what can you do to help? You can check out our City Council and Legislative Email Writing Workshop on YouTube. Right as I finish my presentation, I will drop that link if you'd like to check that out. It's just a quick walkthrough on how you can reach out to your City Council and ask them if it's okay for us to come and present and talk about approval voting and see if they would be interested in writing one of those letters. We think it's great for them to hear from their own constituents. Lastly, you can sign up to volunteer and donate on our website. We're always in need of volunteers and funds to keep this effort going as we try to improve the election system for everyone in the state. And I have a slide on here for questions, but I think we're doing that at the end. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Nate. There's a lot to think about here. And that's why we're going to go to Brian McKenzie, who will tell us how to think about all of this. Brian.
Thank you, Kathy, and Nate and Kayleen, thank you for your presentations. I don't think I will tell you how to think on these. I think the presenters have provided a lot of information for the listeners to consider and think through and weigh out. It's really important that we point out that currently in the state of Utah, as we talk about alternative voting methods, this is solely and completely an issue for our cities. Our municipalities get to choose whether or not they want to participate in the alternative voting pilot project that we currently have. Now, also, it's important to recognize that the legislature has limited that so far to only include ranked choice voting. As it relates to the clerk's position on these different voting methods, we have taken positions on different voting methods over the last few years, as these have been brought up between the legislature. But I think regardless of that, as we look at it as administrators and as the state considers alternative voting methods, our hope would be that that a thorough independent study of the various different alternative methods be conducted, and that we really look at it from a state perspective of what are our goals, what do we want to accomplish by considering an alternative method. And then weigh out those goals and those objectives with what these different methods can offer. And then as a state, select this and use it for as a full implementation throughout the state. Our biggest concerns are currently with the pilot project that we have is that it is used on a limited basis only in certain cases. And that does create some concerns with consistency. You know, electoral reform is not new to the state of Utah. We transitioned to a primarily vote by mail state. During that process of transition, that's one of the lessons that we learned as county clerks as we were involved in that, is the importance of consistency in voting methods. It helps instill confidence in the voters when they know what to expect. Regardless of what method we choose, there is going to be a learning curve. That learning curve may be higher in different methods that are considered, but we can get past that if it is a consistent voting method. We can teach and train the voters what to expect and move forward with that. There's going to be arguments on all sides of these type of voting methods. There's going to be the pros, there's going to be the cons. But we can weigh those pros and cons out if we know what our objectives are as a state policy as we move forward. That's probably all I have to add to those. I know that we have a number of questions that are out there, and be happy to answer those as we move along.
We do. And Brian, so has anyone suggested an independent study? That sounds like the League of Women Voters likes data, and it seems like an obvious thing to ask for.
As a Clerk Auditors Association back in 2021, we issued a joint statement encouraging and really sharing those points that I just shared now of how important it is that whatever we do, we look at it and we ask ourselves, what is it that we want to accomplish first? Then we're able to look at, take an example that you're looking to buy a new car. Usually you consider what it is that you need. How many passengers do you need? What kind of towing capacity do you need? What kind of fuel efficiency are you looking for? What colors are you wanting? You think about those type of things before you go out and talk to a salesman. I think that's very important. As a state, we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we need? What is it that we want from our voting process? Are we perfectly content with what we have? Are there things that we want to change? And if we are able to set up that structure, then as a state, we can, for lack of better words, go out shopping and take a look at ranked choice voting or approval voting or star voting or runoff elections or whatever it might be, and figure out the best solution out there to fix the things that we're wanting to fix.
Great. So do one of you, either Kelley or Nate, want to explain what star voting is?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So disclosure, I am on the board of Equal Vote, which advocates for star voting. So basically this method just asks voters to rate candidates versus ranking them on a scale from 0 to 5. So you can give multiple candidates 5 stars or 4 stars if you'd like to. The 2 candidates who get the most stars go to an instant runoff election where they're compared on each ballot, and whoever has the higher rating on the most ballots ends up being the person who wins the election. It's a very effective method in terms of choosing the most representative candidate. I'm a big fan of star voting. I think in Utah, the simplicity factor is important, and that's why we advocate for approval voting here, but I also very much like star voting.
Is it used anywhere in the United States?
It's not currently used. There have been some active campaigns in Oregon as of recently, but they're still working on getting it passed in the first municipality.
Okay. All right, thank you. I'll go to some of these questions. One of them is asking the panelists what your views are on proportional representation. So Nate, you're on right now. So do you have any views on proportional representation?
Yeah, I'm also a big fan of proportional representation. For those who aren't aware of what that is, essentially just proportionately delegates the amount of people to be elected based on percentages. So if you have 10 people to be elected, and one party receives 30% of the vote, they get 3 of those 10 people, and another party receives 40%, they get 4, and so on. So it's a very effective way to make sure that you're accurately representing the entire population with the number of people that are to be elected. I'm guessing part of the background behind this question is wondering why we advocate for approval voting if proportional representation is so great. For us, the reason that we do that is we see the way that our current system is set up is for single winner elections, whereas proportional representation is for multi-winner elections, especially statewide or for Congress. And so we see approval voting as a good stepping stone on the way there. If people enjoy approval voting and see the benefits of that, maybe we can talk about improving even further to proportional representation later. But it is a big systemic overhaul, and so it's a little bit more of a feat to accomplish to pass something like that versus approval voting, which comes with a lot of benefits and is a very simple change for right now.
Helene, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I also agree. I think it's fair that if there's a city or, in our state where there's a percentage of people who have a different opinion, to be able to be represented. Sometimes when we have a, majority, we ignore the wishes of those smaller groups. We did have a couple of cities talk to us about using ranked choice voting in a proportional way for their city council. That's something the legislature would have to approve, and they haven't yet. But I do think if a city wanted to do that, it should be something they are allowed to do.
Right. I should mention, this is a little bit off the subject, but the league is in favor of proportional representation on a national basis. We would like that. We believe in one person, one vote, and we have an active campaign called One Person, One Vote. So there is another question here. Does approval voting solve the plurality problem? And he says the plurality problem is when a candidate is elected with more votes than any other candidate, but not a majority of votes. And I guess that goes to you, Nate.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will reframe that a little bit because the plurality problem is specifically when you can only choose one person. That produces a plurality voting problem much more often. Going back to the beginning of my presentation today, I think the most important thing is that we choose the most representative candidate. There are some voting methods that attempt to, what I think, synthetically produce a majority, even if a majority of people don't actually prefer that candidate over other candidates. Approval voting, if there is only one candidate in the race who only gets 48% approval and no one else passes that threshold, you're still picking the best candidate in the race. So it's not going to guarantee a majority, but it does guarantee accuracy, which I think is more important. Now, there are some funny systems across the country or people that are wanting to implement such systems that say if nobody reaches a majority, then we just do the election all over again. So I think some people are in favor of that kind of election system, and approval voting would also be compatible with that, where you could actually accurately see if there is somebody who has the majority support.
Okay, great. All right, this goes to you, Kelley. How did Utah set itself up to allow ranked choice voting for some elections? And how likely is our current legislature to extend it past 2025 or be renewed for more elections?
So Utah has quite a long history with ranked choice voting, but it initially started out with someone in the Republican Party who was very frustrated that Ross Perot took enough votes away to spoil the election for George Bush back in the day. And there were a lot of advocates within the Republican Party that said, hey, we should try this. And they brought it to their conventions. People, I mean, there's a lot more detail to this, but generally that's what happened. And people are like, hey, that was great. We, went faster. They liked it. And then there were people who said, why don't we try to use this in our elections? And as the conversations, part of it was this plurality thing, because after the signature, House Bill 54 was approved and people could get on the ballot with signatures, that created a situation where instead of just having a primary election with people that came from a convention or system through the parties, you could have another candidate be on the ballot. So you end up with 3 or 4 or 5 candidates on a primary election ballot. And there was a concern about this plurality problem where we end up electing someone with 30-something% of the vote or 40%. And so there were a lot of conversations about ranked choice voting, and there were some compromises and back and forth, and they decided ultimately to say, let's just do a pilot and let's try it out at the city level and see how it goes. And perhaps we will like it and use it in these party primaries for these races where we're starting to see this issue. So they did, and they approved this pilot program to go for 4 municipal election cycles, with next year being the 4th. In the middle of all this, there were some national things politically where some people didn't like what had happened in ranked choice voting elections in other states. There was a lot of misinformation. And so we had a legislature that almost unanimously approved it, to where now we have a legislature that almost eliminated it last year. We did have legislators telling us they had some political pressure nationally. We had legislators say this is a political decision, not a policy decision. And all I'm hoping for is what we've talked about here. Let's get some data. Let's look at the research and see. So whether it's likely or not, based on last year's legislative session, it didn't look likely. We also didn't know that that bill wouldn't pass to eliminate it, but we have a lot of people in Utah reaching out to their legislators saying, we want to keep this, we like it, our city likes it. The mayor of Mill Creek will tell you their elections are more civil, 70% of their voters like it. So my hope is the legislature will listen to those people and let the cities have their choice. But I honestly right now don't know. We're kind of in an interesting place in Utah watching some changes happening.
Thank you. And of course, the league's position is that a pilot project should finish. I mean, we believe in data, and you can't have complete data without the project finishing. So hopefully, whether it's approval voting, ranked choice voting, whatever, we need that data. All right, this is a question from Kaylin Stanley. In a conversation I had earlier this week, someone said they were concerned that ranked choice voting lobbyists are advocating for having voting machines that aren't regulated by the federal government. Is that true, or is it misinformation?
That is solid misinformation. As one of the lobbyists for Utah ranked choice voting, I can tell you that there is no one on our team or on our board that would ever advocate for using voting machines that aren't regulated by there's a complicated way that things are certified, and Brian could tell you much more than I can about how that works currently, but machines have to be certified at different places and organizations, and I don't know what the current law is, but we would never advocate for or support something that didn't go through all of the certification and processes that need to happen for voters to have trust in those systems.
So perhaps Brian could speak a little bit to the system itself.
Yeah, so in the state of Utah, we have a state law that requires any voting equipment. So these are voting machines, voting tabulation devices. They are required to be certified and meet the certification standards of the EAC. That's the Election Assistance Commission, or the federal agency that works to certify voting equipment. So it has to either go through the EAC directly or through one of their certified laboratories to meet those requirements. Perhaps one of the things that may be linked to this question is with ranked choice voting, the software that is used to do the different rounds of counting, that is outside of our voting system, our voting machines and software. And not in all of those cases is that software certified by the EAC. So the voting machine itself that either you interact with and cast your vote, or the machine that takes your ballot and scans it and accounts for all of the voting selections that the voter has made, those are certified. They're required to be certified. But the software that then those totals or those tallies are put into, that then goes through the different rounds of counting, that is not required to be certified in the state of Utah. And in some cases, it's not necessarily certified by the EAC.
So have there been any problems with this software that you're aware of?
Davis County has not administered any of the ranked choice voting elections, but we have some colleagues in the state of Utah who have. I have not heard of any issues with the software that's been utilized now.
Okay, thank you. All right. we have another question that asks, how does approval voting account for the spoiler effect? Nate.
Yeah, great question. So the spoiler effect basically refers to vote splitting. So in a race where you have three people, and let's say we have our three major presidential candidates this year, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and RFK Jr., what can happen is if you have two people who are liked on a similar level and then a third person who has a small level of support, they can pull away a certain percentage of votes from one side or the other and be seen as a spoiler candidate. Approval voting directly addresses this issue. So because you are able to vote for everybody that you like and you don't have to choose between one major party candidate or another, you can choose one of those candidates and also your favorite if they happen to be the independent or third party candidate. It directly addresses the spoiler effect and makes it so that we guarantee that whoever is elected is actually the most liked, not chosen because they won through some kind of strategic means.
Okay. And I think, Kelley, you mentioned something about the spoiler effect in your presentation, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Finally, I'm not sure I completely understand this question, but it says, does a primary election followed by a general election create a synthetic majority for the general election winner?
Yeah, so I think this question is for me because I mentioned something along the lines of a synthetic majority for
okay.
other voting methods earlier. I don't think that a primary election followed by a general election creates a synthetic majority. The largest reason some other alternative voting methods can produce what I call a synthetic majority is because of ballot exhaustion. And basically what can happen in certain voting methods is your preferences get exhausted and whoever's left in the final rounds of voting or however it's done in automatic runoff, such as in star voting, whoever's left, you might not have given a preference on. And so what happens is that there is a majority of people that are votes haven't been exhausted that are still shown in that final round, which looks like it's over 50%, but there's a good number of votes that may have been exhausted that weren't included in that final tally. So it's not actually a majority of the amount of people that cast a ballot in that race.
Okay.
One other thing to add to that, there was an article, I believe it was in the Tribune after last year from around the Sandy, or in 2021 around the Sandy ranked choice voting mayoral election. So there was a primary, there was a, no, when you look at the first round of voting, the two top candidates had like 19%, 20%. So you could say 60% of the people did not want those top two. So if you'd had a regular primary, those top two would have gone to the general, and then someone would have had a majority just by nature of there being two. But sometimes that could be called a synthetic majority because you can say 60% of the people didn't even want either one of these people, but those were your choices in the end. And so they become a majority just because there's only two candidates left to vote on. So does that make sense?
So I'm sorry to kind of go through this again, but for those people out there who don't completely understand, can you explain what ballot exhaustion is and what a wasted vote would be? And I'll just throw that out to whomever, maybe Kelley.
Yeah, so when you have a ranked choice voting ballot, people are free to vote for as many or as few candidates as they choose. So let's say there are 5 candidates for a particular race, and they vote for one, and in the first round, their candidate only got 10% and they're eliminated. Well, that ballot is exhausted because there are no more choices. That vote counted, their first vote counted, but they didn't vote the rest, so that ballot is no longer in the counting by the voter's choice. So that sometimes people misunderstand and think that if you don't vote for all of them, none of your votes count. But every time you vote, that vote will be weighed in on the round of counting. But if people choose not to rank them all, that's an exhausted ballot.
Okay.
And I will add in, there's one interesting quirk to that where if your second choice candidate gets eliminated and then later your first choice candidate, your second choice doesn't actually get counted, which I think is a large problem with ballot exhaustion. And certain ranked choice voting methods, not all of them. Kelley mentioned proportional ranked choice voting earlier, which I think deals with that problem pretty well. So that is an interesting quirk of ballot exhaustion where sometimes all of your preferences aren't actually counted depending on the order of elimination.
But you always have one vote that's weighing in on the current, like if they do 3 rounds and you have a vote there and your candidate loses. So you're saying the candidates that didn't come up because that vote was that person lost, right?
Yeah, like that, right. If your second choice candidate on your ballot gets eliminated in the first round and then in the next round your first choice candidate gets eliminated, it'll skip to your third choice. So you still have someone in that round, but your
Right.
second choice doesn't actually get counted. So that can be problematic if people feel like they wanted their second choice to be considered. But yeah, as long as you list, basically as many people are in the race, as long as you rank all of them, then you don't have to worry about your ballot being exhausted.
Yeah,
Mhm.
interesting. I guess we have to all get used to losing at some point. There is a question here from Alex. Could Colleen speak to situations where ranked choice voting eliminates the most preferred candidate? For example, in a race with 3 candidates, a third-party candidate might be the most approved of overall, but that could still be eliminated first due to having the fewest first choice votes.
So I guess you would have to say, how do you know that they are the most approved of overall? But you're right. If there are 3 candidates and they divide those votes and nobody has 50%, the person with the least number of first choice votes will be eliminated. And so if they're out, that means the people didn't prefer them strongly enough to vote for them for their first choice. So then they would be eliminated in that first round. So my question is how you could know that they were most approved of overall, if they didn't have enough first choice votes to stay in the race.
I don't know.
No.
I think they might be referring to if a candidate is everyone's second choice, and because they were no one's first choice, they didn't win, but they might have been most liked by both sides of the population. And so I guess in that circumstance, you're still kind of featuring vote splitting where the candidate who is kind of the consensus candidate between both sides is being eliminated first because they didn't get enough first place votes, which I think points to an interesting philosophical discussion, which you kind of referenced there, which is if someone doesn't have enough passionate support, should they make it to the next round? Which I think approval voting falls on the side of broad consensus candidates are more important than passionate support, and ranked choice voting falls on the side of passionate support. But I think that gets pretty into the weeds of philosophical discussions of voting methods.
Yeah, I guess with ranked choice voting, there is an opportunity to rank your preference. And if you feel more strongly about someone, you would need to put them first because you do risk them being eliminated if they are a distant third or whatever at the bottom of the ballot.
Mm-hmm. So it seems like the strategy in the last Salt Lake mayoral election was to vote for only one, despite the fact that there was a list. Does that work? Is that a good strategy? Or, I mean, the winner won, let's put it that way, but I don't know if that was a good strategy or just something that they did politically.
I think it's a common thing because we're so used to it mattering that you could help someone else. But really, if your first choice person, you only voted for one, was out, you just wouldn't get to weigh in on the other 2 candidates. So it's not a strategy that's going to help the person you care about the most by not voting for anyone else, because the only way those other votes are going to come up is if the person you like the most is eliminated by not having enough votes to go to another round. So I hear it a lot. I know people don't want to fill in a bubble by a name of someone they don't like, but basically you just are making it so you don't get to weigh in on the remaining candidates. And if you hate them all the same and you don't want to do it, that's great. You can do that. But if you feel like I kind of like this guy better than this one, you might want to go ahead and vote, but it will never hurt the person you ranked above to vote for anyone else below them.
Okay, we have another question here, which is all about math, I think. What is the difference in voter turnout between primary elections and general elections? Relatedly, does the law of large numbers relate to whether voter turnout affects the election result? I don't know what the law of large numbers is.
I don't either, but I do know that primary elections always have a lower turnout, and municipal primaries are notoriously the lowest turnout of all elections. It depends on the race and what's going on. Obviously, presidential elections are bigger turnouts, but you typically see, and Brian maybe knows the current numbers better, obviously knows them better than I do, but you do see much lower turnout in primary elections, and I don't know what the law of large numbers is either.
Maybe Brian does.
I am not familiar with that term. I was trying to think through that. I can answer to the first question. Yes, there is a difference in turnout in primary elections. What we see in all types of elections, there's really two things that drive turnout. One is the issues or candidates. You know, how much passion and excitement there are around those type of things. And then the second is the voting method. You know, is it accessible? Vote by mail, obviously, here in the state of Utah has had a significant impact in the turnout and participation in our elections. But yes, we tend to see a lower turnout in our primary elections than we do in our general elections.
Okay.
And just from a quick Google search, it looks like the law of large numbers just refers to, in a voting scenario, the more people that you have in the race, the better you're able to choose the candidate that most reflects those voters who participated. I think would be true. I mean, I think it's good to have as many people giving their opinion in an election as possible, and that way we can choose the candidate who does best reflect. So I would say, yeah.
So Kelley also said that the law of large numbers just means that when you have a lot of data, there is less error, implying higher turnout is better. And of course, we're back to data, and we all want more data. Okay, I'm going to give you each of just a minute just to wrap up. Tell me what you think. Tell the people what they need to be concerned about and what might be coming up in this next legislative session. Nate, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, first, again, thanks for being here. Katharine, thanks for having me on the panel. It's been a pleasure to speak about approval voting and voting methods. It's something that I'm very passionate about. In the upcoming general session, we're hoping that approval voting can either be added to the pilot project or another way just added as an option for cities to use approval voting. Like I said, there are some cities that are already interested in giving it a shot, and as Brian said, this kind of comes down to the cities and what they want. So I think having as many options available to test is a great idea. And then we can get the data and see what shakes out, what people across the state of Utah like, and how it works to choose the most representative candidate. So we're really excited to continue this work. If you want to help out, definitely check out our website, utahapproves.org. And if you would want to consider writing an email to your city council asking if they'd like to see a presentation on approval voting.
Right. Kelley, any last words?
Yeah, thank you again for the opportunity. Thanks to everyone who's here and for your interest and concern. And thanks to the League, who does such great work in our state and around the country. I always see them out doing good things. So thank you for spreading the word and educating voters. I think in the next session, we'll probably see a possibility of them trying to end the pilot again. We do have legislators that feel really strongly that it's a good thing and others that don't. I also feel like we need to get some data. We need to say, what did we learn from this pilot? We need to finish it out, bring in all the information, and then look at it and say, did it work and did it not work? There's plenty of misinformation out there about what has and hasn't happened, plenty of misunderstanding. But if you do feel strongly, just like Nate said, let your elected officials know, let your legislators know, let your city council members know. If you want to try ranked choice voting, we are happy to help support you and bring information to your councils. They need to hear from the voters of Utah. They often hear from a small group of people who are have very strong opinions, and they think that, you know, when you're an elected official, you hear from 10 people and you're thinking the whole city feels the same way, but that's just not how it works. So it's important to speak up and let people know your thoughts who are elected, because they have a lot of hard decisions to make and they do care about what you think. So thank you for the opportunity.
We agree, Kelley. I mean, the League is all about telling your legislators, telling your representatives what you believe, what you want, because they will often hear from one person and then suddenly you have a law.
Mhm.
Brian, do you have any final thoughts?
Yes, thank you. Thanks again for having us. As county clerks, we recognize that each alternative voting method may have its strengths and its weaknesses. We would encourage the policymakers within the state of Utah to consider what the objectives, what the goals are in any type of significant change to our voting method within the state, and seek methods that can be implemented for all of our elections to ensure that consistency is moved forward. Again, if change is needed to our current process, then change should be made. But let's make sure that the correct change is made and that processes be consistent throughout the state and throughout every election. Again, as the public officials charged with administering our elections here in the state of Utah, we're committed to providing fair, transparent, and secure elections. We offer our support, our knowledge, and our expertise in this effort. If any of our watchers or any citizens within the state of Utah have questions about elections, election security, election administration, I encourage you to reach out to your local county clerk. They're happy to visit with you, tour you through their facility, talk to you about different voting equipment and their thoughts and feelings on various voting methods as well.
Thank you. I mean, we do appreciate all of our county clerks. We have an amazing voting system. Of course, anything can be improved. Thank you all for participating. Let me just remind you that this webinar is recorded. It will start out on our Facebook page. Our website right now is in transition, but it will be there soon. So please watch it, everybody out there, and share it with other people because this is an important issue. Thank you all and good night.
Thank you.
So, everyone.